Hello YouTube community, thank you for supporting our channel and watching. So today what I'm going to show is how to connect different wires, different connections, different type of connections, different wires, what's a wire gauge. Okay, so for that we need different wires. We have a solder, it's non-leaded solder. We have flux, we have a wire crimper, we have a wire stripper, we have heat shrink. Okay, we have different connections, different connectors. Okay, we'll talk about these, what they are. We have the heat gun, that's for the heat shrink. We have our soldering iron. So the wiring that we're dealing with, it's considered primary wiring for automobiles. The gauge is the thickness of the wire. The smaller the number, the thickest the wire. So you can see the difference between the 10 gauge, 12 gauge, 14, 16, 18, 20, and 22. The higher the number, the skinnier the wire is. Generally speaking, on automobile, it's red color represents the positive, black color represents negative. When we talk about the crimp connectors, like these ones, they come in three different colors. You'll have yellow, blue, and red. The yellow generally is for 12 to 10 gauge wires. The blue one is from 16 to 14, and the red one is 22 to 18 gauge. So make sure you choose the appropriate one. This information can be actually found on a crimper as well. So if you look here, you have red, blue, and yellow, and they give you the gauges are written right here. At this point, it was all faded, so I've written it same thing. It's yellow, blue, and red. Okay. So here we're using a 14 gauge wire. Okay. And so we're going to strip the wire. You use the 14. Okay. Right here, the number 14. So put the wire in 14 and pull. Okay. If you need to cut the wire with this type of stripper, wire stripper, there's your cutter. So cutter is right here. If you're using this type of cutter, the cutter is right on the top. And same thing, it'll have markings 22, 20 gauge, 18, and then 14. As I said, these are faded. It's a very old stripper. So hold it where the appropriate wire is, because you don't want to cut the strands inside. Okay, you don't want to cut the strands inside, so make sure that you don't use the wrong wire stripper. Okay, you want to strip about just over 1/4 of an inch. Okay, so just over 1/4 inch, that's what you want to strip, and then twist the wires. Okay, twist the wires together. So we're using a 14 gauge wire. We're going to use a blue connector for it. So this type is called insulated connector because it's insulated with plastic all the way around. This type is called non-insulated, and how you join them is different. So another thing about this is, I'm not sure if you can see this in the video or not, but there's a hump up to this point. Same thing on this side, there's a hump up to that point. Okay, so what that means is up to the hump there is just plastic, there is no metal. There is metal inside, you can see that. So you need to crimp where the metal is, not where the plastic is. Okay, so we have the wire twisted, we insert the wire in. Okay, we choose, so for insulated we use these three. Okay, this is the part that we use for insulated. This is the part that we use for uninsulated, so I'll show you that in a moment. Okay, so choose the blue one. So I have it held just where the metal starts, and we got it in the blue part. Okay, and then you just crimp. Okay. So there you go, that's how you crimp this. Okay. Okay, so if we are using a connector that is non-insulated, there is no plastic on here. So for that part, we are going to use we're going to use this part of the crimper right here. Okay, that's what we're going to use, right? So what's important here is you see that at one point it comes, so this is where the joint is. You can see that crack right there, that's where the joint is. So what you want to do is you want to have the U part, it goes in here at the bottom, and where the seam it comes together, see right there, there's a seam that's coming together, that gets held like this. Okay, you put the wire through. Okay, so the wire is in, and you crimp. Okay, so this is what it should look like. Okay, so now it's there, it's not coming off. So some other type of connectors, this is a good connector if you have a wire that's existing wire that's going, but you need to pull a third wire out of it. Okay, so let's say that we have there's a wire that's already existing. This wire is a long wire that's going, or it's existing wire, but we need to put, so how this looks like from inside is it's got one side blocked, so that's one side blocked and the other side goes through. So this is going to be our existing wire. Let's say that we need to connect the third wire to it. So what you do is you put this in here. Okay, you get a regular plier, push this tab, that tab right there. Okay, that tab, you push that down. Okay, what it does is it pierces both wires. Okay, and then you close this and it becomes an insulated connection. Okay, so you have, this is your existing wire, that's a wire that I've joined. Here is another type of connector. Let's say that you have an existing wire that's running, it's a long wire going from point A to Z, but you want to add the third wire to it. But the third wire that you're adding, you want that to be removable, so you should be able to take that off anytime you want. So what you do is, this is the type of connector you use. Okay, you crimp that in. Okay, close that. You get the plier. Crimp that in. So now that piece of metal that you have seen, that has pierced through this wire. So we put a connector on our third wire, the wire that we want to add to this, but we want this to be removable. So now this wire, you can just insert it in here. Okay, there you go. So now this wire can be taken off anytime you want. So the next connection we're going to talk about is soldering. That's possibly the best connection you can provide, especially for computer wirings. Okay, so I have a 16 gauge wire, I have heat shrink, we have flux, and the flux is used to prevent oxidation of the connection. Okay, we have solder, we have our soldering gun. Okay, so same thing, you want to strip the wire roughly about just over 1/4 inch. Okay, I have the wire stripped, make sure you twist it, and next I'm going to do is we're going to put flux on here, and we are going to do tinning, a process called tinning. So I'm going to put flux on it. If you have a brush, use that. Okay, so I'm going to show you how tinning is done. So for tinning, as I said, we have already put the flux on top. So what you want to do is you want to put the solder gun underneath the wire. Okay, so what you want is the solder melting through the wire. This is not what you want. You don't want to put solder on top of it, all around it. What you want to do is have the heat gun underneath the wire and then add the solder on top. Okay, try not to inhale all these fumes. We're using a non-leaded one, but you still don't want to inhale any fumes. So what we have done here is the solder actually melted through the wire. The gun was underneath it and the solder was on top. I'm going to do the same thing to the other wire. And when you're doing this, try not to melt the plastic part. Okay, so there you go. So the tinning is done. So there you go. That is called tinning. Okay, once you're finished tinning the wire, don't forget to put the heat shrink on. So slide the heat shrink on. Okay, and then when you're soldering the two wires, basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to put them side by side like this. Okay, so you're going to put them side by side, put the gun underneath it. You shouldn't really have to add too much solder to it. Okay, so I'm going to set it up. Okay, I have that set up and we're ready to solder. So just put the heat gun underneath, and if you need, you might need a tiny bit of solder. Don't put a big blob of it. Okay, so there you go. That is soldered together. So here's the connection. Okay, be careful, the wire could be hot. So here is the connection. Okay, and now all we're going to do is slide the heat shrink, use our heat gun and shrink it. So our last step is shrinking the heat shrink. Make sure it's covering the whole solder area and just shrink it. It'll give you a good connection, or not a good connection, it'll prevent the water and mud, and depending on where you're going with your vehicle, it'll prevent the mud, water going and ruining the connection. Okay, so there you go. That is shrunk. I hope that you liked our video. Thank you very much again for watching.